This is really the opening shot of Blade Runner, and it really establishes the whole look of the film and the whole kind of ambiance of a world gone completely out of control with polluted air, very low visibility, chemical cracking plants in every direction. So the way we decided to do this was a forced perspective miniature. It was built on a tabletop that was maybe 15 feet wide at the back and maybe 8 feet wide at the front, at the foreground near the camera. And the forced perspective, meaning that there are miniatures in the foreground that are at a much larger scale than images in the distant background. And they graduate from large miniatures of maybe a foot or 18 inches high down to miniatures of the background that are half an inch high. And one of the ways we were going to save a lot of money was we went down to San Pedro in California to the actual chemical cracking plants and photographed a lot of silhouettes of towers, tubes, pipes, just all kinds of shapes that would represent this, that we could then reduce to various sizes and give them to an actual chemical etching plant where these silhouette cutouts were pasted together in long rows and then acid etched in brass using a photolithography process. This gives a tremendous amount of almost photorealistic detail. So those are graduated off into the distance at various layers. And one of the kind of photographic techniques that we had used on Close Encounters was an extremely high density of smoke in the photography room while we're shooting, which allows a differentiation between these layers. And so we knew that technique would work pretty well on Blade Runner and be pretty quick and inexpensive to do because we already had all the smoke equipment and the space to do it. So then in the foreground it graduated into actual three-dimensional models of buildings, towers, tubes that we actually built as miniatures. And then there were tens of thousands of fiber optics coming up from under the table into these buildings and into all these layers of acid etched brass to create light into the camera, like street lights and glaring lights, but also to create this differentiation between these layers. There were also slots cut behind a row of acid etched brass. There might be a slot under the table and light coming up to kind of backlight and silhouette that particular layer. So you have this big forced perspective miniature. When you light it up with the fiber optics under the table, the lights under the table, an ambient light in the air, and then all this incredibly dense smoke, it starts looking pretty good as long as you control the smoke to where it's completely obscured at the horizon line. You just cannot see to the horizon line. It's important to remember that there was actually only one pyramid, and we built only two sides of the pyramid because you can only see it from two sides at the most at any one time. And we could just duplicate it to make it look like two pyramids. And in the case of the distant pyramids, it's actually a flat ectochrome photograph of the pyramids just pasted onto a pyramid-shaped light box with some neon lights inside the light boxes. There was a tremendous amount of heat generated by the lights underneath the table. There had to be a lot of fans and a lot of cooling. The crew often had to wear masks because, you know, living for hours on end in a smoke environment is not a pleasant experience. Then the next step was the introduction of these flames and explosions on the top of these cracking plants. One of the ways we did the flames was to go out in the parking lot at night. We had huge burners of propane gas, and we would let off these belches of propane gas, shoot them with probably 72 to 96 frames a second in 35 millimeter. That would give us plates of gas against black. These explosions really came from another film that I was working on several years previously called Zabriskie Point for Michelangelo Antonioni. The whole idea was to envision a kind of a carpet bombing, out of control, almost a terrorist attack on Los Angeles at night. Bruce Logan and I and a crew of guys went out to the desert where we could get an explosive permit and hired the MGM pyrotechnics team to come out and bring all of their their worst stuff. And they brought these huge cauldrons of bundles of dynamite, naphthalene, phosphorus, all kinds of other mixtures, and then fill it half full or three-quarters or full with gasoline. And we'd be way back in total darkness, and they would blow this thing off. And we'd get as large an explosion as we could possibly get, short of a thermonuclear bomb. We had these thousands of feet of footage of explosions, but I lost the job on Zabriskie Point because Michelangelo just didn't kind of agree with this particular approach. So the 35 millimeter plates of these explosions and flames would be rear projected onto a little screen. But they'd actually place the little screen right at the top of where the explosive source would be. We'd know exact timing and location of when that explosion was going to go off. There was also a pool of light that whenever we knew that an explosion or a flame was going to explode at the top of a tower, there would be another, as though that big light was shining down on the area below. You see this blooming of kind of source light. And we made a mistake in principal photography where we were 3 frames late, which has now all been digitally corrected in the final director's cut of Blade Runner.